On this edition of ITG, the Mountaineers are back home, and they've still got something to play for. The Baylor Bears heading to town with 3 games left on the schedule, the penultimate home game for WVU. We'll get into all of that and more on this edition of In the Gun.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
I've got the best teammates in the business here, all right?
No way!
They both played the game. They both know the game. Owen is the runaway beer truck known for having some fun.
Owen Schmidt, you have a podcast, In the Gun.
Owen Schmidt, like a runaway beer truck down the sidelines.
Jed is the signal caller who is the X's and O's and the brainiac.
First of all, Jed's research is pretty impressive.
So we've combined those two skill sets.
Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You are In the Gun.
Once you enter this family, it's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 210 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I'm Wes Schuler. We got the best teammates in the business. We got Mr. GQ, the beer truck himself, Big O. And we've got the signal caller, Jed Drenning. And, of course, you already know this episode of ITG brought to you in part by our friends at Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for online betting. Everything from football, NBA, college basketball, NHL, UFC, and boxing. It's all at Bet Online. The game starts here. Big weekend across campus, gentlemen, for our different big week kind of in general for a lot of different WVU athletic programs. Men's and women's soccer, both in the conference tournaments. Women's basketball team just boat raced Pitt by 30 points at home Tuesday night. So a big shout out to women's hoops. Men's hoops is up here in Pittsburgh in that Oakland district of Pittsburgh to take on the Pitt Panthers in a little backyard basket brawl, 8 o'clock Friday night. And then, of course, back home for the Mountaineers after a bye week and a few weeks on the road to take on the Baylor Bears, 4 p.m. kickoff. 3 games left, 2 more home games, so the penultimate home game coming up here, if you will. So a big week. Jed, obviously capped by, the sport that we all care about and love the most, the one that the one that does stir the drink, of course, football. And, hey, what all of a sudden now is an important game. It's been a back and forth season, right? But you have given yourself the opportunity to play important games down the stretch here with 3 to go.
Yeah, and it's we're catching a Baylor team that's really humming. And when you look at West Virginia's 5-4, I think there's some parallels to Baylor's 5-4. And what I mean by that is we've talked at length about our 4 losses are all quality losses to top 30 teams or so. You'd like to win one of those games, but that's who we've lost to. Well, when you look at Baylor, they're perched at 5-4 as well, and look at their 4 losses. Their first loss came early in the season in week 2 on the road at Utah against the Utes team that was still believing. That's back. Remember when Cam Rising was actually playing a little football? He played most of that game. So that was one Baylor loss. That's a forgivable sin. They lost on a Hail Mary on the road at Colorado in a game that they had won. That's loss number 2. They lost by 6 to BYU in a game in which they outgained the Cougars, pushing a BYU team that's now pushing the top 5. That's the 3rd loss by Baylor. And the 4th loss was on the road at Jack Trice Stadium in Ames against Iowa State in a game that they led in the second half. So there are 4 losses. So you don't think that they're saying some of the same things that we're saying, and we're catching them hot. We're going to break down some of the numbers in terms of what they've done in recent weeks. They're coming off a bye. We're not. So that's kind of interesting as well. It's not the last time that'll happen this season. But so they've had 2 weeks to heal up after a 3-game winning streak, and their offense, Jake Spavital, a name that West Virginia fans are, of course, very familiar with, came into the offseason, replaced Jeff Grimes, the O coordinator who was jettisoned and is now at Kansas. Well, Jake came in, and I don't know if you could be more different than what Jake Spavital's philosophy and scheme is compared to what they were running in previous years with Jeff Grimes. So yeah, they hats off to them with what they've done in the last 3 weeks. But if you want to look at some numbers and just the vast improvement, not just in the last 3 weeks, but over the course of the season, Baylor guys last year, they were dead last in the Big 12 offensively with just 32 touchdowns all season. Well, with 3 games to go, they already have 39. Uh, they were very methodical last year. They played field position, they played time of possession. Not the case anymore. They are a tempo football team. They're dead last in the Big 12 in time of possession, 129th in the FBS because they don't care about time of possession. They will tempo you and tempo you. They're in the top 10 in the country in terms of how much they tempo. And watch when they get in the red zone because nobody runs faster tempo in college football than what they do in the red zone. They have the fastest paced offense in the red zone. They want to catch you out of alignment, catch you in a bad spot. They lead the Big 12 in big plays, 30 plus yards, despite only playing 9 games when a bunch of teams in the conference have 10. So the splash plays are coming in both the pass game and the run game. We're going to start talking about some of their personnel after a while. But in the offensive coordinator switch, another thing, Owen, that you got in switching from Jeff Grimes, who we talked all about the wide zone and the stretch play. Well, with Spav, what Spav likes, a lot like Dana, who, that's kind of the tree that he comes from. He's an inside zone guy. And you really see it when you watch tape, and the metrics back up what you're seeing on tape. No Big 12 team runs more inside zone than Baylor does with Jake Spavital. Matter of fact, about a third of the time they run the football, it's going to be an inside zone. And obviously, big difference between the scheme that we faced last year and previous years with Baylor and the scheme even that we faced last week in Cincinnati, the stretch play, the outside zone. We talked all about that versus the inside zone. The stretch play, that's more reach blocking by the offensive line in a horizontal game. The inside zone is more drive blocking in a vertical game. So different kind of challenge in the run game. And when you look at what they've done with that run game in those recent weeks that we talked about, they're averaging 285 a game in their last 3 games. Guys, that's number one in rushing offense in all of Power Four football. It's the first time since 2016 they have 250 plus rushing yards in 3 consecutive games. And when this is the last thing I'll mention on this, their stuff rate, which is the number of times you smack them at the line of scrimmage. It's been very difficult to do. Their launch point, they're getting out of the blocks fast. Their stuff rate's under 9% by a wide margin. That is number one in the nation over those last 3 games. So that offensive line, which was populated by a lot of freshmen last year, now they're a year older, a little bit longer in the tooth. They're humming as they approach the end of their second year of college football. They were one of the youngest units in all of the land last year. So they're going to be a handful. They really are. We're going to talk about their quarterback, some of their skill guys, and their offensive line. But just big picture, they are playing, I think, right now, the best, most complete offense, not just in the Big 12, but among the best of any team in the country.
Well, Big O, you know what? That transitions nicely to something that I wanted to ask you. Could you almost argue the bye week came at a bad time for Baylor? When you're playing as well as they have the last 3 games, and when you've been humming like they're humming, is it almost like you wouldn't want the bye week? You don't want to sit at home for a week. Could you almost look at that and say the bye week, it's all right for WVU because these guys were playing so well, and maybe now, I don't know. What was your experience with that? Like when you're playing so well, it is late in the season, you're banged up. Everybody always wants to buy from that point, right? But how do you balance wanting that rest versus you've been playing your best football now for 3 weeks in a row?
Well, dude, when you're hot, right? And it's
Right.
it's tough to cool down a hot hand, and that's definitely not what you want to do. But these are, that's scheduling that comes out, you know, obviously months before the season even really rolls. So, as far as a player goes, perspective, I mean, if you're humming, you want to stay on the gas
playing,
pedal,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, you want to keep playing, but unfortunately, that's a little bit cool down. But sometimes too, it's it's not such a bad thing, right? You know what I mean? You're playing good football when you need to be playing good football. You get a break, you kind of recoup maybe some of these little nagging injuries amongst some players. You keep a good practice going, you keep the good energy flowing. It's really all how, in my opinion, bye weeks are all on the coaches. They're all on how they got to feel the team out. Team's going to come to practice regardless, but it's really the coach that gets out of what they need to get out of it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's not all about just getting a full weeks of practice in, right? Sometimes it's about rest. Sometimes it's about competition. Sometimes it's, and so forth and so on. But in my best football, I guess, experience, really you always like to buy at the end of the year, like the last game of the season.
Rank up.
Now it would be nice right before the playoffs.
And Owen, what's really interesting about it, when you get even more granular, let's look at the bye from Baylor's perspective on the offensive side of the football, because most teams during the bye, one of the things you also want to do is rep your young pups and get those guys some reps in live scrimmage situations. But like you talked about, the coaches are the ones really getting ready for your next opponent during that extra week. So think about the offensive staff. Jake Spavital was sitting there in Waco, and he doesn't get to spend 2 full weeks entirely understanding what to expect from West Virginia defensively. Why? Because we fired our defensive coordinator the first week.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, he's waiting for us to play Cincinnati, wondering, hey, situationally in the red zone on third downs, yeah, I can practice against their 3-4 construct, the basic construction of what they do. But what kind of difference is this Jeff Goons guy going to make? What am I preparing for? And that wasn't until after the Cincinnati game was over that he truly understood what the differences might look like heading into week 2. So you could argue maybe they were spinning their wheels a little bit for that reason on the offensive side in Baylor, as opposed to the Baylor defense, which for 2 weeks fully knew what to expect with the West Virginia offense, if that makes any sense. So it's kind of a unique situation with the bye week for Baylor in that sense as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you don't really know because of that little, I don't know what you want to call it. There's been some other things that have happened with that situation since then, an orange jumpsuit. But, as far as Jake getting ready, I agree with you completely. You don't really know. You start out with one thing, and he's obviously broken this film down now, and has probably obviously tried to come up with some sort of intangibles at what's going to play back and forth, or what are they going to use, what are they not going to use. But still, it's just one game. So can you really find a ton of tendencies in just one game with one guy leading the show? I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see what he pulls out. In his best interest, from my observation, blowing out the no huddle and just trying to wax us on defense is going to be their best shot with offense, in my opinion.
Well, it's going to be interesting. And let's, I know Jed has a bunch more, got into some of those numbers there, has plenty more on the personnel, obviously. Let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll get into that offensive personnel for the Baylor Bears and how they might look to attack this new look WVU defense, or how the new look WVU defense might look to stop their attack, I should say. A thank you to our friends at Toothman Ford as well, our guy JR and everyone there at Team Toothman. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. We'll continue talking about the Bears, focusing on that offensive side of the football, get into some personnel when we return on the other side. You are in the gun.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations. With more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
Back in the gun here as we roll along. We continue talking about the Baylor Bears rolling into Morgantown this weekend. Jed, we went through some of the numbers with their offense, particularly how lethal they've been the past 3 weeks, particularly in that run game. So let's get into some of the personnel. I know obviously their quarterback, Sawyer Robertson, is part of that success that they've had in the run game as well, too. I don't know. I'll leave it up to you to go as far as to call him a running quarterback, because, I mean, I know he's got a very good QBR, and he's putting up some good numbers in the pass game as well, too. But certainly a guy who can contribute with his legs, who's got kind of that all-around skill set that you're looking for at this level.
A couple key points statistically from an overview standpoint. I won't bore you with all the overall standings offensively, but let's again hit those last three games. Those last three games, they're averaging 531 total yards a game offensively. They're averaging 45 points a game offensively. We mentioned the 285 rush yards a game in those three. And here's the other thing. For the season, they're only 61% red zone touchdown rate. Only 61% of their trips have been a touchdown, which is toward the bottom of the league. But in those last three games, 77% red zone touchdown. Again, against the West Virginia defense that showed some life in the red zone last week, but for the balance of the season has struggled dead last in the Big 12 in touchdown rate itself. But you mentioned Sawyer Robinson. Interesting situation here. He's a Mississippi State transfer. He was a standout in Texas and went on to play for Mike Leach at Mississippi State before last year transferring back to Texas to play for Baylor. They had a transfer from Toledo in the offseason, Daquan Finn, who was the MAC Player of the Year. And he was a stud in the MAC now, guys. He piled up some big numbers with his arm and with his legs. And they had a quarterback battle in camp. Daquan Finn won that battle. He started the season opener as Baylor's quarterback. Sawyer Robinson was a holdover as last year's backup. He played pretty extensively against us and played very well. 17-19 against West Virginia. Do you remember that? 86.5% he completed against us. That was as big a part of that comeback or that battle we had with them as those kickoff returns were. But Daquan Finn beat Sawyer Robinson out in an open battle in August. Starts the opener. He even started on the road in week 2 at Utah. Well, he gets dinged up. So, as it turns out, Sawyer Robinson kind of Wally pipped him. He stepped in, took advantage of the opportunity created by the injury to Finn, and he really hasn't looked back. When you look at the numbers that he's posted so far this year, 59.5%, he's averaging about 223 a game through the year, but the efficiency comes when you look at his touchdown to pick rate. 17 touchdowns, only 4 picks, more than 4-1. Incredibly impressive there. And when you look at the global rating that ESPN attaches to these guys, this QBR, which kind of it factors in or bakes into the equation just about every part of being a quarterback, situationally, statistically, and otherwise. Sawyer Robinson is number 1 in the Big 12 with a QBR of 84.2. Now, when you look at that completion percentage, it's just a hair under 60. Part of that is Jake Spavital, and this has always been kind of what Jake does, he likes to push the football vertical, and he's going to give his guys on the perimeter a lot of opportunities to make 50-50 catches. So sometimes that impacts your completion percentage, and that's kind of what you've seen with Baylor. They have 3 or 4 different guys, including a tight end, that have made multiple contested catches, but you have to have the opportunities to make those catches, and you're only going to come down, even if you're effective, maybe half the time with those. So that accounts for part of that low completion percentage. But you mentioned the fact that he runs the football as well, guys, and enough to really scare you. In other words, when I look at what we saw last week in Brendan Sorsby, yes, there's parallels there. He can, not only can he extend plays, but he can be weaponized in the red zone. For the season, he's run for 257 and 4 touchdowns. Another alarming number, 37% of his rush attempts move the sticks. So long story short, Owen, and I'll have you talk about their starting running back, Bryson Washington, but Sawyer Robinson has really settled into a comfort zone in Jake Spavital's offense, and he's turning into somewhat of a standout, and he's been blistering hot as the tip of the spear for this offense that's piled up all these massive numbers over the course of the last 3 weeks. When they brought Spav in the offseason, it didn't take long to energize that room that really stagnated last year. They suffered in just about every key category offensively, but it's been reignited under Jake Spavital, his version of the air raid, and Sawyer Robinson has been the perfect point man, as it turns out. He was with them all along. But what do you think about these running backs, Alan?
Well, we'll talk about Bryson Washington first, redshirt freshman. So that's a little bit impressive from Texas. High school athlete, hoops player, track and field guy, stand out in the triple jump, which is impressive. Means he's got some dynamic leg strength there. This year not too bad, even though they are short. Yes, sir, Wes. Yes, sir. 583 yards on the ground, a nice little 6-point average on the yards per carry, 7 TDs. So not bad as far as the production goes. Last game he had a big game, near 200 yards, 4 TDs versus TCU, 130 yards in his last 3 games. So he's definitely cranking it up, and you can see that with what you've been talking about, Jed. And I'll give a shout at number 35 here, Dawson Pendergrass, sophomore, kind of the bigger punch of the two running backs at 218. He is the bruiser. He's from Texas as well. This year he's got just shy of 400 yards, 6.2 average, which again, very nice average for a running back. 3 TDs, 142 yards on 6 carries versus Okie State this year. So, a nice 1-2 punch. They got a speedster, they got a big guy, they got a big bruiser. Jed, what are you anticipating for this week? And Jake, what do they got?
Well, when you look at Washington, Owen, you talked about that 130-yard average in the last 3 games. He's been the most consistent point of this offense and really stirring the pot to pile up all those big numbers. It all starts with that. They've really leaned on this run game to set up the pass game, not vice versa. So it's interesting because I think you've really seen. I used to sit down and watch tape with Jake, and he's a fascinating guy to pick his brain, see what he's looking at, see what he's thinking. He's innovative. I remember when we had Trayvon Wesco, he was trying to come up with some different things to maybe, or even the tight end room in general, some different things to maybe. I'm trying to remember if Wesco was the guy that we were talking about at the time, but we had some guys in the tight end room we were happy with, and I know he was trying to innovate and come up with some ways to get them the football, but watching tape with him, and he would get all excited. He'd say, "Hey, look what I got here," and he'd draw it up for me, and then show me how it's going to be a spinoff of something we already had as part of the offense. But he's a very creative guy, and as he's grown into this run game portion of things, that makes him all the more dangerous because he has a quarterback background. He's always seen the big picture of reading secondaries, diagnosing coverages, and attacking them and hitting their soft spots. So when he brings this balance that they've brought as of late, that makes him incredibly dangerous. And they have a 1-2 punch. One's explosive, one's physical. And I'll tell you what, Owen, I'm not going to make a comp here, but when I look at Pendergrass, that 35, I think the reason that 6.2-yard average is there, his game's physicality, but kind of like back when you were playing, you punch, and once in a while hit a big belly play and swell that average up. That's kind of what he's doing. Like, look at what he did against Oklahoma State. This kid had 142 yards on 6 carries. That doesn't sound like bruiser numbers, right? That sounds like burst numbers. So it's kind of he's touching both those worlds with the brand of football that he plays. But yeah, they've got a 1-2 punch that can make some things happen. And what's amazing about this is when you see the guys that they were playing last year, they return their top 2 guys from last year, and those guys aren't really getting reps. These guys have kind of displaced or dislodged them and become the factor in the run game as opposed to the couple they had last year. And you're seeing some of the same type of thing happen on the perimeter. Wes, starting with Josh Cameron, who we're going to talk about from a special team standpoint too, but you want to talk about this big-bodied freak?
Yeah, 44 targets on the year, 29 catches, going for over 14.5 yards per catch, 7 touchdowns. Jed, you mentioned how good Baylor was in the red zone, and talk specifically at how they were accomplishing that with some tempo in our first segment. 5 of his 7 touchdowns come in the red zone, which I think is impressive because he's not a small guy, but he's not he's not a throw it up to him in the end zone in the corner, right? Fade route and want him go get it. He's 6'1", so he's not small, but he's not a freakish tall athlete either. He's a thick guy. So they find ways to get him the ball in space. Again, 5 touchdowns in the red zone of his 7 on the year. Another Texas guy. Seems like a lot of their playmakers are in that kind of 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2" range, about 210, 220, somewhere in there. He's another one of those guys. Josh Cameron, Jed. And so, I guess for their wide receivers, it starts there, right? Because like I said, 44 targets makes him their most targeted guy. You got to talk about Ashton Hawkins as well, too, though. He is a little bit smaller, 5'10", 170. You guessed it, also from Texas, transferred from Texas State, where, of course, he played for Spav there when Spav was the head coach at Texas State, correct, Jed?
He was the head coach, and then last year, after he was fired, he became the OC at Cal.
Right.
So the Ashton Hawkins kid stayed at Texas State, but did have a couple years under Jake at Texas State. So that helps that room. When you get a guy who comes in and you're trying to install a new system, Wes,
speaks the
to
language.
Have somebody who's battle tested, he speaks the language, he's been in it. Yeah. So he caught 141 balls at Texas State. So he's a very established product and commodity coming in. 27 grabs, 14-yard average. He's reached the end zone 3 times. They're spreading this around. They're one of they run as much or more 11 personnel as us, with one back, 1 tight end, and 3 wides, and they have the personnel to do that very thing. When you go to even what I would call in our breakdown here, wide receiver number 3, but that's not entirely accurate. He has actually more targets. Hal Presley, he's been around that program. Another big guy, long frame, 6'3", 210 pounds. Another Texas guy, 42 targets. 15-yard average, 20-plus catches, also 3 touchdowns. Again, they're spreading the wealth, and all these guys are pitching in and making plays. A couple years ago, last time they were up here in Morgantown in 2022, he had a touchdown catch against us in that game. And here's what's funny about it. It speaks to the depth of this room, Wes. Monterey Baldwin is a guy that it seems like we've talked about him as a shifty playmaker in the slot for them for a long time. But now I don't want to call him an afterthought, because about the time you do, he's going to have a massive game against us or have a critical play against us. But he's getting the 4th biggest share or bite of the pie. I mean, he's waiting on these other 3 to make their plays and get their opportunities, and then kind of enter Monterey Baldwin, who is dynamic, explosive. He has 10 career touchdown catches at Baylor, but a compact 5'9", 170 pounds or so. But he's played a lot of football for him. But he's number 4. So again, it speaks to the depth that they have. But Owen, you want to hit on this tight end, because they lost the Dabney kid and they bring this kid in. And in the age of the portal, that's kind of the free agency dimension of it. But I think this guy's a good fit for what Jake's trying to do, this Trigg kid.
Real quick, before you do that, let me just thank our friends at Fortis as well, too, for presenting this episode of ITG. Our buddy Rick Lewis, we all know, for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com. Big O.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Number 1, Michael Trigg. Hey, kind of bounced around a little bit, USC and Ole Miss. Kind of a tweener if I was really talking about a tight end, right? 6'4", 246. Not super tall, but not the tweener like me, a 6'3" guy. So 246, right about in there, I guess you'd say. This year, 37, sorry, 23 catches, 12-yard average, 2 TDs, 37 targets, 9 missed tackles, forced ever catch, which is impressive for a big guy like that, to be able to shimmy and shake. Doesn't have much interest in run blocking, which Jed has alluded to me, so which tells me he just doesn't have the want, doesn't have the grit. It might take to be an NFL top pick, but nonetheless, Jed.
And
Isn't that a
it's
problem
all
though?
going to
If they're
start.
running if they're running a lot of 11 personnel, isn't that a problem if you got a tight end who doesn't want to block?
He's on the field a lot. He's definitely a receiver first. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about it when you watch tape. He does create some mismatch issues for you from a personnel standpoint. But yeah, he's not going to. I don't think you're going to see him playing in me wishbone offense. This is what I'm saying. It's I don't see that happening. But maybe these days when you're under 2.5 bills as a tight end, that's a little on the light side, right?
That's what I was
Actually,
sayan. I mean, he's kind of
yeah,
like
yeah,
he's a tweener guy. He's not,
yeah. So, but he is athletic. Boy, is he athletic. And I mean, there's a reason he started his career at USC, right? And migrated to another school at Ole Miss and lands in Waco. But all this is going to start at the offensive line. And what intrigues me is you had an offensive coordinator last year in Jeff Grimes that was really an O-line guy. That's kind of his pedigree. And you lost him after all these freshmen were playing last year. By the end of last season, Baylor had 5 freshmen on the offensive line and they're 2 deep, which was the most in the country. And 3 freshmen started 17 games. This is our guy from Pick Six Previews put this together, and he always does a great job of really getting specific about some of these inner workings of these O lines and otherwise. But that was the 3rd highest total in the country, 17 games by true freshmen. Those growing pains have paid off. You've seen some production and continuity from them this year. They returned 4 starters, and they're playing really well together. And when you look at some of the strengths and some of the maybe liabilities of what they're doing up front from a pass pro standpoint, they've really held their own. Now, you might have a soft spot or two. One of those tackles, number 69, isn't quite as effective or technically sound as the other tackle. You might have some opportunities against the run there. But it's going to be interesting to see what TJ Jackson, who leads the Big 12 with 12 TFLs, 7 of 9 games he's registered as TFL, guys, what he might be able to do against this crew. But let's wrap it up by hitting a little bit more on Sawyer Robinson. Again, flesh him out because he's such a central part of what they've been doing. When you get inside the 40, when they get inside the 40, I should say, this is where it gets interesting. I talked about they go tempo in the red zone inside the 20. To Jake's credit, he wants to get you misaligned. When he gets in the red zone, they're going to really, really hit the gas pedal hard to try and get you misaligned and light the tempo up faster than even before that. But even when they get inside the 40, that 20-yard area where you're on the cusp of the red zone, the scoring area from the 40 down to around the 20, in that 20-yard area of the field, Sawyer Robinson, they start taking shots. You see it on tape, them taking shots, and you see it in the metrics. His average depth of target, we always talk about that metric, which represents all the throws you're making, just average it out, jumps to 11.9 yards per attempt, which is from that area of the field, the second deepest in the Big 12. And he has 8 touchdown passes in that 20-yard area. So they're taking shots at the end zone. Those 8 touchdown passes are tied for the second most in the country. If you look at his numbers under pressure, he takes a huge drop, probably bigger even than most others do. He drops from an efficiency standpoint, from a completion percentage standpoint, down to 38% under pressure. Scrambles a little bit when that happens. But what's funny is if he gets impatient in the pocket, he's not going to hesitate at all to take off there as well. You see a lot of that on tape. to extend plays, and you always work about that maximum stress on your back end on your secondary when those athletic quarterbacks extend those plays, because that's where so many of the big things happen. But and then Owen, from a turnover worthy play standpoint, to me, this is something you really want to dial in and pay close attention to when you're watching a quarterback. How do they respond to pressure? More specifically, how do they respond to blitzing? You noticed last week, Jeff Kuntz blitzed a little more than we're accustomed to seeing from a West Virginia defense. Now, to credit to Jeff Kuntz, when I watched the tape and I broke everything down, it wasn't as much as it seemed. And that was kind of the point. He wanted to make it seem like a lot more than it actually was. But the ones that we actually did bring pressure, they mattered and they impacted things. Well, here are the numbers with Sawyer Robinson when he's blitzed versus when he's not. When he's blitzed, he has the second most turnover worthy plays in the Big 12, 7. So when you get after him, if you pick your spots and outnumber them, he doesn't respond well. He will put the football in harm's way for a guy who otherwise has been incredibly protective of the football. But when he's not blitzed, he has the second fewest turnover worthy plays in the Big 12. He only has 3. And we mentioned that QBR. I go back to that. Everything I'm talking about on some level is factored into that equation, giving him that 84 plus QBR, which is number 1 in the conference. Time to throw, he gets it out 5th fastest in the conference. His average depth of target in general, again, it's over 10 yards, but Jake likes to push the football vertical. This offense is all about, yes, he pushes the football vertical, but it's about the inside run game with that inside zone. It's about the quick game. Sometimes it's even attached to that inside run game. You're going to have RPO elements attached to the perimeter. But Jake's also a quick game guy, and then he likes to take his shots downfield. It's up a tick. When you look at their 20-plus yard throws, it's not up dramatically, but it is up from what they were doing with Jeff Grimes last year. So it's a fundamentally different offense. Ironically, we talk about all this tempo this year as opposed to last year when they were more slow-paced and methodical. Their snaps per game offensively are actually lower this year than they were last year. That's just been the general nature of 2 things: the flow of the games they've been in and their big playability. They haven't needed as many plays to get down the field and matriculate on a drive. So that's kind of what we've seen from the Baylor offense. What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, first of all, we got to get some pressure on the young man because according to your research there, Big Dog, we need to fluster him up. We need to fluster him up. Wes, I mean.
Yeah, their quarterback has a better than 4-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I want to see our defense go hunt the football and take the football away like they did last week in Cincinnati. Anybody can do it one time, fellas, but if you do it 2 weeks in a row, I'm going to start thinking it's a pattern and it's a new trend, baby.
There you go.
So, yeah, I mean, this is a real test. They've got a quarterback that, as Jed said, has been at the wheel and has been playing at a high, efficient level. They've got a run game that is going for close to 300 yards per game over the last few weeks. They've got senior-laden playmakers. I mean, all their wide receivers are 3 seniors and a junior. I mean, they've got Michael Trigg, who has played a lot of Division I football in the Pac-12 and the SEC, and now the Big 12. I mean, it's a challenging offense that is playing their best football. So if our defense can go out and have success against these guys, I'm going to start to believe that maybe they have turned a corner, that maybe these 2 games have become a trend, that maybe they are a better unit than we thought they were for the first chunk of the season. And if we are going to continue to talk about playing meaningful games down the stretch, I think our defense is going to need to continue to show that against an offense that's humming like these boys are.
I've had watching tape this week because I'm not used to being on the business end of what Jake does, right? Usually I'm watching tape and I'm really enjoying it, the creativity and all the good stuff he does. And, that's a wrinkle he didn't have before. That's cool. Hey, good job, Jake. Because it reminds me, I'm having Liberty Bowl 2014 vibes. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you remember when we faced him as the OC at Texas A&M? That's kind of what it felt like watching tape that week, with that team, with Kyle Allen. And I'm back to that, and I don't like that feeling. But to Jeff Kuntz' credit, the best compliment that I can pay Jeff Kuntz is after doing a post-mortem, not just watching the tape, but diving into the numbers and cross-referencing both, I walked away thinking, wow, I thought we blitzed a lot more than that. And that was the entire point. See, what he needs to do is understand, here's the personnel you've been handed. Here are the strengths. Here are the shortcomings. Here are the limitations. And make the most of that personnel. And what that means is we are not built to go man-free, blitz you 45% of the time, and just go man coverage, because that will be exploited time and time again. You need to pick your spots to go man coverage and blitz, and pick as many as you want up to the point that they don't see it coming. Because as soon as they start diagnosing it and see it coming, that's bad news for us. Because Jake will create a mismatch. Jake will get somebody on somebody we don't want covering them. And the next thing you know, we're in a really bad spot because we're blitzing. So as long as we are able to do it, whatever that is, 6, 7, 8, 10, I don't care how many times it is, so long as it's one less than it takes them to figure out when it's coming. That's what it comes down to. That's why you can't just go out wholesale for the balance of 60 minutes and bring pressure, because they'll see it coming, they'll diagnose it, and they have answers for that. So as long as you don't let the offense, specifically in this case, Jake Spavital, reach that point, you'll be in a pretty good spot defensively if you can confuse him on any level close to what we confused a very intelligent, high football IQ quarterback last week in Brendan Sorsby, and make him do boneheaded things like the throw that he made on 4th down, which was so out of character for him.
Yep. Let's run it back. Let's keep it going. Before we spin the block to the Baylor defense, another thank you to our friends at Johnston Equipment for being a presenting sponsor of everything we do here on ITG. Now at Johnston Equipment, you can get 0% financing for 72 months, plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. You got to visit Johnston Equipment on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan. All right, Jed, this defense is one that is tricky for me to, I don't know, put a finger on. They are just about average statistically in most of the major categories across the conference. I don't think they're fantastic, but I don't think they're bad. I know you've got some context though, and some in-depth information. So what do we need to know where it starts for Baylor on defense?
Well, let's start with this. The two areas that they've improved the most, because they were a sieve last year. 3rd down, they have the second best defense in the Big 12. So they do a great job situationally in that transition down sequence. And they've also gotten a lot better in the red zone. From a touchdown percentage standpoint, they're up to number 6 in the conference. And those are two of the many areas that they struggled with a year ago. What they did was they made another staff change, in the sense that for the first time since 2019, winning the national championship at LSU, Dave Aranda assumed play calling duties on the defensive side of the football. He kept his defensive coordinator, but he just became much more hands-on. They were in a bad spot last year, as we all know. They struggled down the stretch. They ended the game on a long losing streak. The posse was really after Dave Aranda. I was kind of hoping the fans would get their way and they'd fire him, because I really want him out of there. But unfortunately, the fans didn't get their way, and we still have to deal with him. I wish they could get rid of him. I really do. But he took over play calling duties, and you can see some of the differences. Some are subtle, some not so subtle. For instance, he is an odd front defense, always has been. He's a 3-4 guy, runs a lot of quarters coverage. You're going to see a lot of too high safety looks. As a matter of fact, you're going to see more too high safety looks out of Baylor than just about any team in college football. And what he does out of that, he'll run these simulated pressures. Remember we had Cody Alexander on in the summer, Wes? Well, he's very dialed in. Cody's very dialed into this system of defense. And this is really speaking Cody's language with what Dave Aranda does with these creepers and sim pressures. Long story short, here's what a sim pressure is. They have 3 down defensive linemen, and they have 4 linebackers. Now, sometimes they'll do kind of like what we do from a personnel standpoint, maybe put an extra defensive back in for one of those backers if they want to go nickel, or 2 extra DBs if they want to go dime. But Their base 3-4 configuration, here's what makes it different than most. They will run more simulated pressures than just about anybody. And here's what I mean by that. You'll see one guy step up from the second level and he'll occupy the offensive line. And then on the snap, he bails out and somebody else out of that group of second level players brings pressure. For instance, one of the things you might see happen, you might see the will backers step up and occupy the weak side of the offensive alignment, thinking, hey, he's coming, when in fact the ball snapped, he bails into coverage. And meanwhile, from the wide side of the field, here comes the nickel back or the wide side back or the Sam backer. So that's how he'll try and confuse you. And what it's all about is getting the offensive line to miscommunicate and waste resources. Because if you think one guy's coming, you're gearing your protection toward blocking that guy. So not only are you out of position because you invest things toward moving to help against that guy, but you're out of position for the guy that's actually coming. So that's the long and short of what his sim pressures are. But what's interesting is last year when he wasn't calling it, you saw a lot more 5-man pressures. In other words, they had the 3 down linemen and 2 second level players coming. Not nearly as much of that this year. He's back to more 4-man pressures. And technically, you could even say that unless you're bringing a 5th defender, that's not really a blitz. If you're just bringing 4 defenders, that's kind of a basic pass rush. But that's kind of what the difference I've seen is. Like last year, they were getting gashed. And those 5-man pressures, they were really getting gashed. You remember when we beat them with a game winner, hitting Jaheim White up the rail? That was a 5-man sim pressure. And that's what they were doing kind of all year. But that was one of those simulated pressures they struggled with last year. When they went 5-man sim pressures last year, they weren't successful at all. They really struggled with a 5-man rush, 10 touchdown passes allowed, no interceptions. So one of the things Dave Aranda's done, he's intervened. He's gone back to more 4-man where you're dropping 7, picking your spots, trying to confuse the quarterback, trying to confuse the offense. And that's an advantage that they have. And from a personnel standpoint, it's all going to start with those 2 backers. More specifically, if you want to talk about Keaton Thomas. Keaton Thomas was a junior college All-American, and he's really stepped in and played some really good football for them. And the other linebacker, Matt Jones, a super senior who has played a ton of football for them. And those are the 2 that, by and large, make this thing hum. But that's the challenge. Another odd front defense. So Brandon Yates is going to have a center, by and large. He likes to run a lot we call tight front, which is a heads-up nose guard. And you're going to have 2 defensive tackles on the inside shoulder of the offensive tackle. He'll move some things around, but that's kind of his base set. So once again, you have to communicate properly. Don't get mixed up and pick the wrong guy as a second level rusher. You have to ID things, communicate. This week, it's going to be so much about the critical part of that because, again, when you saw last year, they were trying to get after you with 5-man. This year, 13 of their 18 sacks have come from a 4-man pressure. So you're going to see more of that than you're going to see anything. And we call this, when you look at, there's 2 types of coverage. It's MOFO or MOFC, middle of field open or middle of field covered. Middle of field open basically means some form of a 2 safety shell. That could be cover 2, a 2 deep zone. That could be quarters, but you still have those 2 safeties parked high. Middle of field covered means you have a safety in the middle. It's just the opposite. Well, when you look at the numbers that Dave Aranda has utilized this year, 59% of the time, they've run middle of the field open, which is number 1 in all of college football. So you're going to see a very, very steady diet of that. Some form of a 2 high shell, 85% of the time, which is number 2 in the country. Now, there are times that, and they don't bring a lot of pressure by definition. In other words, a 5th defender. When you see the blitz rates being low, you think, wow, only 20% overall. Why is it only 20%? Because they're not really counting that 4th guy that you're bringing from the second level. It's not often they're bringing the 5th guy, which would be the blitz they're talking about when they break these things down. Even as blitz rates, when you go to 3rd down, which is typically a high blitz rate down, it only climbs to 24%. So 76% of the time, they're not bringing more than 4 guys on 3rd down. That's 100th in the country, that rate. So it shows you they don't often do that. And even when you get in the red zone, Another area of the field that you would anticipate pressure, anticipate blitz, only 28% of the time, also 100th in the country. So that's kind of what you can expect. It's a challenge because Dave Aranda is a very crafty, very high football IQ defensive play caller. I kind of wish he wasn't back to calling plays defensively, but unfortunately he is. And the baseline, just as you touched on, Wes, none of these numbers are necessarily, not many of them are necessarily going to blow you away. But the fact that Dave Aranda took that mess that was kind of thrown together like a ransom note last year, that was just absolutely so porous in so many categories that couldn't stop anything, and got them to the middle of the pack in just about every key category except the standout categories that I talked about, that in and of itself has been very impressive by the turnaround on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, sure has. And I think particularly the last couple games, as we've said as well, too, where they've been playing very solid football. And you know what, guys? I mean, the last 2 years that we've played Baylor, it's come down to the wire, down to the last play or two, back and forth. 2 years ago in Morgantown was that crazy Thursday night game. Hey, first game Big O and I went to together. We had a blocked extra point that we returned. I mean, there was a lot of craziness in that game. And then last year, obviously, in Waco, a back and forth game. Baylor has two kick return touchdowns. The Zach Frazier legendary heroics, and the Mountaineers scoring in the waning seconds of that one to get their 8th win of the season. I expect another not for the faint of heart, clenched butt cheeks type game Saturday come 4:00 at Mountaineer Field, between two teams that are, I think, liking their chances and liking how they're playing right now as well too. So going to be a lot of fun.
Well, on that back end, guys, the good news for Baylor is they have their whole secondary back, but that's also the bad news. So if that makes any sense. So that there are some opportunities to make some plays there. But Wes, I want to hit some miscellaneous and special teams to close this thing down, because this is a very intriguing miscellaneous and special teams matchup. There's a lot of meat with this one.
Hopefully not one that scores 14 points on us again this year.
Yeah. That's one of the subplots here. But first of all, from a fourth down standpoint, West Virginia and Baylor are tied for most fourth down attempts in the Big 12. Nobody goes for it more than us and them. The good news is they're dead last in the Big 12 in fourth down defense. Let's keep it that way. If, in fact, we decide to go for it on those end of possession downs that Neil likes to talk about. Okay, Baylor is the second most penalized team in the Big 12, averaging 67 penalty yards per game. West Virginia is the second least penalized team in the Big 12. Now, that's going to matter when you start stacking up hidden yardage. Okay, that 32 yards a game for West Virginia, 67 for Baylor. That 35-yard difference is going to matter when you get into some of these special teams matchups. We mentioned Josh Cameron earlier, 6'1", 218. If you think that makes him formidable as a receiver, just imagine what it makes him as a punt returner. When he's taking one step, planting a toe, and hitting a seam. He leads Power 4 football in punt return average at nearly 21 yards per punt return. So we're going to have to weaponize Ollie Straw. West Virginia, with the best punt coverage in the Big 12, that's going to have to happen. When you look at Baylor's Jamal Bell from a kickoff return standpoint, number 2 in the Big 12 with an average of nearly 25 yards, had a big return for a touchdown against Colorado. That Colorado game, guys, it kind of showed you what a massive difference return units can make. Baylor's kickoff and punt return units combined for 210 return yards against Colorado, and that was almost enough to win that football game. Baylor's kickoff coverage unit, number 1 in the Big 12, number 3 in FBS. They have a kicker in Jack Stone, 72% touchback rate. So they don't have to often even face a return. But when they do, they've been very effective at it, Wes. You mentioned the 2 kickoff returns by Richard Reese last year. That was an off-season project for West Virginia. We had to shore that up, and we have. We are number 5 in the Big 12 in kickoff coverage, but there's some pretty good kickoff coverage units in this league because we're 25th in the country in kickoff coverage, allowing just 17. And here's what's impressive. We're taking the long way around that it's a heavier lift for us because we're not getting a lot of touchbacks. When you look at the teams in the top 30 in kickoff coverage, we have had to defend more kickoff returns than anybody else in the top 30. And we're still holding that 17-yard average, to me, making it all the more impressive. Again, we mentioned Ollie Straw, our punt coverage unit, number 1 in the Big 12, 14th in the country. Here's something else, guys. Bears punter Palmer Williams. You talk about a boomer. An average of 50.8 yards, number 1 in the country. But guys, what's the old adage? Outkick your coverage. 16 punts have been returned, most in the Big 12. Maybe an opportunity for P. Fox to impact that hidden yardage, starting field position. So a lot of incredibly intriguing dimensions to this third element of the game, this transition unit portion of the game when you look at special teams. Fascinating, starting with the fact that we have to cover, and we might have an opportunity in the punt return game to make a couple plays. Let's see.
There you have it. Special teams has been I think a pretty consistent net positive lately. Let's keep that rolling. Defense, let's keep that momentum rolling. And yes, let's remember, Jed and I joked about this on Monday, but the Baylor football program has never done a certain thing in Morgantown. Starts with a W. Let's keep that streak alive. I'm not going to say it because it's like when a pitcher has a perfect game going or a no-hitter going, you don't say, "Oh, look, he's in the middle of a perfect game." But Baylor's never done this thing in Morgantown. It rhymes with sin, okay? Starts with a W and rhymes with sin.
You never talk to a place kicker before he's attempting a game-winning field goal. Or there's some things you just don't do, right? I mean, some things you just don't do.
Well, one thing we do here on ITG is we make our weekly pick'em before we get out of here. Signal caller, beer truck, offense, and defense of the week. We'll do that for you as we close this thing down when we return. You are in the gun.
There are better-known tractors in the world than Coyote. Ones with bigger names, longer histories, more popular hats, cute toy lines. But there's not a single tractor ever been built that's better equipped to do the dirty work. So we'll just focus on what really matters. Coyote, we dig dirt.
Now at Johnston Equipment, get 0% financing for 72 months, plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. Visit us on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan.
Wrapping up this edition of ITG, and before we go, we have to recap, update our weekly pick'em, and give our next predictions here for Week 12 of the college football season. So before we get into this week, Jed, how did we do last week?
Well, I sent the updated standings. Now, you're going to help remind me. I know that I missed last week and got a big goose egg because I picked Oklahoma State, and they didn't place in the top 5. If I remember right, you picked BYU against Utah.
Correct.
You finished second, so you got
Correct.
4 points.
Yes.
Owen picked UCF, finished second, got 4 points. Skylar picked TCU, finished second, got 4 points.
Skylar ended the longest drought in history.
He had 5 consecutive goose eggs.
Man was drier than the Sahara Desert. Good Lord.
Oh, wow. Updated standings. Wes takes over first place at 33. I'm at 31. Owens at 23. Skylar's at 15. Down the stretch they come.
Big O's getting hot. Don't let Big O get hot. Don't let him get hot.
Meanwhile, let's hit our fans last week, our listeners, our viewers. 2 people. Okay. Nobody got the offense. Nobody got the defense. Nobody got the passing. 2 people got the rushing correct. John from Adamstown, Maryland, and Kevin from Harmony, North Carolina.
Kevin, John, great job. You guys are smarter than a fullback.
We both picked Iowa State.
Hey, that's good
Excuse me.
off-season. That's
Excuse
good
me,
off-season
Kansas.
content. You just can't. Are you smarter than a
Hey.
fullback? That's good off-season content.
Wes, that's the great irony. The great irony is, guess who they picked and won? Kansas. The only week Owen doesn't
The only
pick
week
Kansas.
Owen doesn't pick
That's
Kansas.
right. Kansas rushes for the most yards. So,
Oh, good Lord. Fantastic.
anyway, you want to go with Skylar and get the picks rolling?
Since Skylar is leading up the caboose here, we'll give his pick first. Offense of the week, who's going to score the most points, and he is taking the lowest hanging of the fruit, but that's okay. I don't mind that, all right, because that low hanging fruit can be juicy too. He's taking the BYU Cougs at home against Kansas. BYU, obviously the lone undefeated team left in the conference, as Jed said, sniffing close to the top 5. At home against a Kansas team that's been struggling. So Skylar is taking the Cougars off a dramatic rivalry victory. Will there be a letdown? We'll have to wait and see. Newly minted father, Skylar Callahan, goes BYU. Jed, where are you going for your signal caller of the week?
I'm going Rocco Becht and the Iowa State Cyclones at home against the Cincinnati Bearcats and their 11th ranked Big 12 passing defense. I'm going to go with Rocco. I haven't done that this year. I'm looking at the other matchups. That's my pick, and I'm sticking with it.
Big O.
What you got?
Big O, beer truck of the week. Who's going to rush for the most yards, big dog? Uh-oh. Oh, yeah.
I'm going with our boys at home against a somewhat of a formidable Baylor team that seems to be doing well these last 3 weeks. But in my opinion, we are going to rumble this week.
Rumble.
Okay,
Young
Owen.
man rumble.
Owen, here's the good news. Baylor 7th in the Big 12 against the run, but on the road, they're 11th against the Big 12.
But it was a tough look. Not a lot of teams playing. Okay. Not a lot of teams playing. Okay. The best two rush defenses are playing each other. Okay. Which also has some of the best running backs. I don't know. You know what I mean? I couldn't go there. I'm going with our boys in blue.
Love it.
It is tough.
So for defense of the week, who's going to give up the fewest amount of points in the Big 12
Let me see if I can
conference?
guess, Wes. Let me see if I can guess who you're going to pick.
Go for it.
Okay, 45. Oh, you're going with. No, you're not. Are you going to shock us and go with Colorado?
For the first time this season, I am going to shock you and go with Colorado.
Okay, all right.
Listen, as much as I hate to give them credit because they are very easy to root against and dislike, Colorado team is 7-2, taking care of business, playing good football, ranked in the top 20, and against a Utah team that I think has just the wheels have fallen off. And how much do they really have left to play for? They are emotionally zapped after last weekend.
You do
Games in
realize
Colorado as well too, in Boulder as well too.
That's the one upset we definitely want this week.
Correct. Now, maybe I'm putting the jinx on it, and that's fine if I do.
Okay.
And that is also, too, Jed, that's a 10 a.m. local start in Colorado, right?
Yeah, that's tough.
God, I couldn't imagine being a
that
student.
is tough.
That's a rough start.
So maybe Colorado's slipping, and maybe Utah comes out and, boom, boom, scores a couple touchdowns real quick, and it ends up being a high-score game. Man, I couldn't imagine 10 a.m. start. Good Lord. I mean, I like to get up and start drinking beers in the morning. You can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning, but a 10 a.m. kickoff is rough.
In the morning.
Hopefully they'll both be sleepwalking and Colorado will win like 3-0. And maybe Utah will win 3-0 and then I'll get second. We get the WVU gets what we need and then I get second place anyways. But I'm going to take the Colorado Buffaloes. First time I've picked them all year for my defense of
have some fun
week.
with Wes is going solo, it looks like, this week with Phil Steele. And I'll tell you what, you're going to have – I want to see what Phil says about Kansas BYU because that game is so intriguing. The line's only 2.5, BYU minus 2.5. You talk about an emotional hangover. The way they won that game last week.
Oh, Kansas, I'm going to talk to Phil Steele about it.
Yeah, Kansas all of a sudden looking. We've said all year they're better than their record. The Cougars are tough to beat in Provo, but man, that's an interesting game.
Can't wait. I will. Big O scared me. I will have Phil steal Friday for you solo. It's going to be fun. I can't wait. Phil and I are going to run through the big games nationally and the Big 12 games. So, as you know, this is not our last episode of the week. We still do have Phil Steal Friday to come for you, but that will do it for this edition of ITG. You know where to get involved if you want to get involved in our
one day, Wes, we're going to have to release. It's in the archives, but we have our Cincinnati preview.
Oh, yeah, we do.
Again, poor Skyler's in the hospital. He's not sleeping. He has a new baby. So we didn't get that posted, but it's out there.
It's the lost
so
episode.
Maybe one day it's the lost episode. Yeah. Of
maybe
ITG.
Maybe this off season, if we're all like on vacation or something the same week, we'll just drop that one in the middle of of July.
Since it was a win.
Yeah. See how accurate we were in the face of victory.
You were talking about the pick'ems for the fans.
But yes, if you want to get involved with our weekly pick'em, just at the top of our Twitter page, @InTheGunPodcast, it's pinned there. It's so easy. You make boop, 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 pick 4 buttons, put your email address in, and your name, and that's it. And we don't send you nothing unless maybe you do really well. Then you never know. Maybe you'll get an autograph or something like that in the mail or something one of these days too. Always a possibility.
The quarterback situation. Neal is playing it close to the vest. Garrett was cleared late last week, but couldn't really practice, which is why he was the emergency backup. So a decision will be made after Neal sees Garrett perform in 11 on 11, which he didn't see last week. He just had some non-contact throwing and all that. But so Nico's playing pretty good football. Garrett's a difference maker with the offense. So no matter how you stack that, I don't think there's a wrong answer. But I think Nico, irrespective of what plays out in terms, let's say Garrett gets the start, Nico is, it makes sense to me for Nico to play a little bit anyway, to lighten the load on Garrett and some of those shots that he's otherwise going to take. But we don't know what's going to happen. Neal won't name a starter until game day. So
sometimes you got to play the hot hand. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Listen, if we had some bigwig executive producer suit who like puppeteered over this show, we would all be getting our asses chewed out because we did 80 minutes here and we buried the lead. The thing that people probably wanted us to talk about most, we spent 60 seconds at the very end of the episode. We should have
not much to say.
We should have came into this. You should have came into this thing and go, all right, who should start? Who would you start? Who you think's going to start? We should have done that whole first take style
Neal even went
conversation.
So far as to say,
that's what the people want. We buried our ribeye at the very back of the dinner. Good Lord.
Neal even
we gave him green beans and bread before we gave him the ribeye.
He said, not only am I not saying
the whole 80
anything,
minutes,
yeah, I'll admit that I'm not saying anything because I don't want them to know. He even said that.
Jed, bark twice. Bark twice if you're in Milwaukee. Jed knows something. Oh, and you know why? You know why Jed didn't bring that up to the last 60 seconds of this episode? Because Jed knows something we don't know. Jed, bark twice if you're in Milwaukee.
You like my shirt?
I do like your shirt, by the way. It's a Star Wars blue moon. I noticed that about halfway through the episode, and I said that's the most Jed t-shirt ever. It's a Star Wars blue moon t-shirt. It is fantastic. That'll do it for this edition of ITG. Phil Steal Friday still to come. A big weekend ahead. Let's beat hoops. Let's beat Pitt in some hoops on Friday night. Keep the hoops momentum rolling and get some of that backyard brawl taste out of our mouth. Let's beat Baylor on Saturday and keep having something to play for down the stretch here. And 4 o'clock kickoff. I'm all confused. The puck drops at 4 o'clock. The gun goes for the start of the race at 4 p.m.
Watch for flag.
Yes, of course. Since it is a 4 o'clock game, plenty of time to hydrate and poke around and have some fun and visit some people. Visit us in the Peach Lot. Oh, it's the boys' trip. So no wives, no kids for this game for our group of rowdies. So our group of rowdies might be getting a little ratty. All right, look at Owen's like, ooh. Owen's doing, what's the guy on Saturday Night Live who puts his hands up to his face? Owen's doing the ooh. It's the lads trip. No wives, no kids. So the flags will be flying, the ITG flag and the Grateful Dead WVU flag in the Peach Lot. Come say hello. Come snag a beer. We'd always love to have you. I think that about covers it, right, fellas?
I think we're good.
For the producer, Skylar Callahan / new father, the beer truck, Big O, the signal caller, Jed Drenning. I'm Wes Schuler. The one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Take care, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. You've been In the Gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.